What I am about to tell you is one of the most chilling, the most baffling stories of survival and death in the wilderness. It is a story whispered in the dark corners of the internet, a mystery that has puzzled investigators, scientists, and armchair detectives for decades. It is the tale of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Imagine, if you can, the vast, empty, frozen heart of Russia, high up in the Ural Mountains, where the wind bites like a wolf and the snow piles up in mountains of its own. It is 1959. The world is a very different place. The Cold War is on. Secrets are everywhere. And in this incredibly remote, incredibly harsh place, 9 young people, full of life, full of dreams, would set out on an adventure. They would never return home alive. What happened to them? What force, what terror, what unbelievable set of circumstances led to their horrifying end? That is what we are going to explore. We are going to dig deep into every shred of evidence, every whisper, every theory, no matter how wild. Because the official explanation, well, it just does not seem to make sense. So let us begin, shall we? Grab a warm blanket, maybe turn on a small light, because the chill of the Dyatlov Pass is about to creep into your bones. Chapter 1. The Dream Team and Their Dangerous Journey. Our story starts not with death, but with life, with the excitement of adventure. It was the winter of 1959. A group of 9 experienced hikers, all students or graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk, now known as Yekaterinburg, were getting ready for a serious expedition. They were not amateurs. These were tough, skilled people who loved the outdoors. They had been on many treks before. Their leader was a young man named Igor Dyatlov. He was 23 years old. Igor was smart, determined, and well respected by his friends. He knew what he was doing in the mountains. This trip, he planned it very carefully. It was supposed to be a challenging one, a Category 3 expedition. That is the highest level of difficulty for a winter trip. It would take them deep into the northern Ural Mountains to a mountain called Otorten. Originally there were 10 of them. But one man, Yuri Yudin, became ill with sciatica, a painful nerve condition, and had to turn back early in the trip. This was a stroke of luck for him, though it must have felt terrible at the time. He was the sole survivor. He would live with the ghost of this trip for the rest of his life. So, 9 young, strong, experienced hikers. Their goal, to reach the summit of Otorten. The name Otorten in the Mansi language means, "Don't go there." A chilling detail looking back. They were well equipped, or so they thought. They had warm clothes, food, tents, skis, and all the gear needed for a long winter trek. They even had cameras to document their adventure. Their journey began on January 25, 1959. They traveled by train, then by truck, and finally by horse-drawn sleigh to the very last inhabited settlement. From there, it was just them, the snow, and the vast, silent wilderness. The early days of the trek were good. They were making progress. The weather was cold but manageable. They kept diaries. Zinaida wrote about the beautiful scenery, the funny moments, the good spirits of the group. Yuri Krivonishenko, the singer, even made up a funny song about their journey. Everything seemed normal. They skied across the snow-covered plains, through forests of pine and birch. The days were short, the nights long, and incredibly cold. But they were prepared. They built fires, cooked simple meals, and huddled together in their tents for warmth. They were a team. They were friends. They planned to send a telegram back to their sports club in Sverdlovsk as soon as they returned. That telegram was supposed to say, "All is well, we have returned." But that telegram was never sent, and the message in the end would be anything but "All is well." Chapter 2. The last days and the strange turn of events. As January turned into February, the weather started to get worse. Much worse. The Ural Mountains are known for their sudden, severe blizzards, and this one was hitting hard. On January 31st, the group arrived at the edge of a highland area. They decided to set up a supply depot. They dug a hole in the snow, covered it with branches and snow, and left some food and equipment there. This was a smart move. It meant they could travel lighter for the final, most challenging part of their ascent to Otorten. They planned to pick up these supplies on their way back. This shows they were thinking ahead. They expected to return. The next day, February 1st, was supposed to be the day they reached Otorten, but the weather had other plans. a brutal blizzard blew in. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The wind howled like a tortured spirit. It was absolutely freezing. Instead of pushing towards Otorten in the terrible conditions, Dyatlov, as a good leader, made a decision. He decided to change their route slightly. They would try to make it over Kholat Syakhl, a mountain whose name in Mansi means dead mountain. Another unsettling detail. They were trying to reach the forest line where they could be more sheltered from the wind and find wood for a fire. But in the whiteout conditions, they missed the forest line. They somehow ended up much higher on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. It was around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun was already beginning to set. Despite the exposed and dangerous location, they decided to set up camp here. This decision has puzzled people for decades. Why here? Why on an open slope, exposed to the full fury of the blizzard, when a short distance downhill would have provided shelter in the forest? Some say they were exhausted and could not go on. Some say Dyatlov made a misjudgment. Maybe they thought they could weather the storm. We will never know for sure their exact reasoning. They set up their large tent. It was a single tent, big enough for all 9 of them to sleep inside. They used their skis to support the structure, burying them in the snow. They dug out a small platform for the tent, creating a bit of a snow trench around it for protection. They laid out their sleeping bags side by side, covering the entire floor of the tent. Inside the tent, it must have been warm, relatively speaking. They would have changed out of their wet outer layers. They would have prepared their evening meal. Maybe they talked, laughed, told stories. Maybe they felt safe despite the raging storm outside. The last diary entry was made on February 1st, just before they set up camp. It was by Yuri Krivonishenko, or maybe Alexander Kolovatov. It describes the worsening weather, the struggle to set up the tent in the strong wind. It mentions the wind was strong and the snow was flying. This was the last direct communication from the group. After this, silence. An eerie, profound silence that would stretch on for days, then weeks, then years. This night, February 1st, going into Searchers followed faint footprints leading away from the tent. They were not clear. Some were bare feet, some were in socks, some in one shoe. They led downhill away from the tent, towards the forest line about a mile away. About 500 meters, that is about 1/3 of a mile, downhill from the tent, near the edge of a small forest of pine trees, they found the first two bodies. They were Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. They were lying side by side, partially covered by snow. They were terribly underdressed for the sub-zero temperatures. Yuri Doroshenko was wearing only his underwear, a long-sleeved shirt, and a single sock. Yuri Krivonishenko was similarly dressed in underwear and a shirt, but he had a sock on one foot and a torn pair of trousers. Both bodies showed signs of hypothermia, which means death from extreme cold. Their skin was bluish-grey, a common sign. But there was something else. Their hands were scraped and bruised, as if they had been trying to climb something or fight their way through rough terrain. There were also some minor cuts and abrasions on their faces. Beneath a large cedar tree near their bodies, there was evidence of a small, pathetic campfire. Just a few charred branches. It seemed they had tried to build a fire for warmth. It was too small, too weak, against the brutal cold. The branches on the tree were broken up to a height of 5 meters, about 16 feet, suggesting someone had climbed the tree, perhaps to look for the tent, or to spot something in the distance. The discovery of these two bodies, and the state of the tent, immediately told the investigators that this was not a simple case of getting lost or caught in a storm. Something far more sinister, far more mysterious had happened. Chapter 5. More horrors emerged. The pine tree and the ravine. The search continued around the area where Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko were found. The ground was covered in deep snow, making the search incredibly difficult. A few days later, on March 5th, about 75 meters, that is about 245 feet, from the cedar tree, more bodies were found. These were Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. They were found scattered between the cedar tree and the tent, as if they had been trying to make their way back up to the tent. Igor Dyatlov was found lying on his back, his arm wrapped around a small birch tree, as if he was trying to hold on. Zinaida Kolmogorova was found further up the slope, as if she had been trying to crawl back towards the tent. Rustem Slobodin was also found on the slope, further away from Zinaida. These three showed similar signs of hypothermia, but Rustem Slobodin had something else: a significant skull fracture, a crack in his skull about 7 centimeters, about 3 inches long. It was not a huge crushing injury, but enough to cause severe pain and disorientation. Was this caused by a fall or something else? That question would haunt the investigation. Their clothing was also strange. They had managed to get a bit more clothing on than the first two, perhaps by taking clothes from the dead or dying. Igor Dyatlov had a fur jacket, but it was unbuttoned. Zinaida Kolmogorova was wearing a sweater and several layers, but one of her socks was missing. Rustem Slobodin had a hat and a few layers, but his boots were missing. The strange clothing situation suggested a desperate scramble. They were not dressed for a leisurely walk in the snow. They were dressed as if they had fled in a panic, then tried to find more clothing from wherever they could. The investigators now had 5 bodies, all dead from hypothermia, but with some puzzling injuries. The broken skull of Rustem Slobodin was particularly concerning, and the fact that they were so far from the tent, without adequate clothing, in the dead of winter, screamed panic. But the nightmare was far from over. 4 more hikers were still missing. It took more than 2 months for the remaining 4 bodies to be found. The snow was so deep, so hard that they were completely buried. It was only on May 4th, when the snow finally started to melt, that the last 4 bodies were discovered. They were found in a deep ravine, about 75 meters, about 245 feet from the cedar tree, and much deeper into the forest. These were the bodies of Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Semyon Zolotaryov. And these discoveries were the most disturbing of all. These 4 bodies were found buried under a thick layer of snow in a stream bed at the bottom of the ravine. It looked as if they had fallen into the ravine or been pushed into it. Their injuries were truly horrific. They were not simply cases of hypothermia. Lyudmila Dubinina had massive chest injuries. Her ribs were broken, many of them, in what was described as a crushing force. Even more gruesomely, her eyes were missing, and her tongue was missing. Her lips were also damaged. It looked as if something had ripped them out. Semyon Zolotaryov, the veteran, also had massive chest injuries. His ribs were broken, just like Lyudmila. He also had his eyes missing. Nikolai Thibault Brignoles had a severe skull fracture, a huge, devastating crack in his head, much worse than Rustem Slobodin's injury. Alexander Kolevatov had a fractured skull as well, though less severe than Nikolai's. He also had some missing soft tissue around his eyes and face. These injuries were not consistent with simple falls. Experts later said the force needed to cause such injuries would be like a car crash, a very high impact. Yet there were no external wounds on their bodies that would explain such internal trauma. No bruises on their skin to match the broken bones. It was as if something invisible had crushed them from the inside. Adding to the strangeness, some of these last four bodies were found wearing clothes that seemed to have been taken from the other dead hikers. For example, Lyudmila Dubinina was wearing Yuri Krivonishenko's trousers, and Semyon Zolotaryov was wearing Lyudmila's hat. This suggests a desperate attempt to stay warm, even taking clothes from their deceased friends. The scene of the discovery, especially of these last four, was deeply unsettling. It solidified the idea that something truly terrible and inexplicable had happened. The Dyatlov Pass incident was no longer just a tragic accident. It was a profound mystery wrapped in layers of snow, silence, and unanswered questions. Chapter 6. The Autopsies and the Official Conclusion. Once all 9 bodies were recovered, they were sent for autopsy. This is where medical experts examine the bodies to determine the cause of death and any injuries. The autopsies were performed by a man named Boris Vozrojdeny, a forensic expert. Here is a summary of what the autopsies revealed in simple terms. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko died of hypothermia. No major external injuries, but some abrasions and minor cuts on their faces and hands. Signs of struggle, perhaps trying to climb or gather wood. Igor Dyatlov died of hypothermia. No major injuries, but some signs of struggle. Zinaida Kolmogorova died of hypothermia. Some abrasions and bruises, but no major injuries. She had a wound on her side, possibly from a sharp object or a fall. Rustem Slobodin died of hypothermia. He had a significant skull fracture, a crack in his skull. The expert said this was a traumatic brain injury, but it was not immediately fatal. It would have caused severe disorientation and pain, contributing to his death from cold. Nikolai Thibault Brignoles died from a massive skull fracture. This was a fatal injury. His skull was shattered. Lyudmila Dubinina died from massive internal bleeding due to multiple broken ribs. Many of her ribs, on one side of her body, were broken in a very severe way. This was also a fatal injury, and as we know, her eyes and tongue were missing. Semyon Zolotaryov died from massive internal bleeding due to multiple broken ribs, similar to Lyudmila, also missing his eyes. Alexander Kolevatov died of hypothermia, but also had a fractured skull, not as severe as Nikolai's, but still significant. He also had some missing soft tissue around his eyes. Out of the 9 victims, 6 died of hypothermia, and 3 died from severe non-hypothermic injuries. Nikolai, Lyudmila, and Semyon had suffered catastrophic trauma. Rustem and Alexander had also suffered severe head trauma. The forensic expert, Dr. Vozrojdeny, made some very important statements. The non-hypothermic injuries, the broken ribs, skull fractures, were caused by an extreme force. He compared it to a car crash. He also stated that there were no external signs for many of these injuries. No large bruises, no major cuts on the skin where the bones were broken. This was highly unusual. It suggested a powerful, blunt force applied in a very strange way. The missing eyes and tongue on Lyudmila and Semyon. The doctor could not explain this. He noted that the soft tissues around the eyes were missing and Lyudmila's tongue was gone. Some theories suggested animal scavenging after death, but the clean nature of the removal was puzzling. The official Soviet investigation into the Dyatlov Pass incident was started immediately. It was led by Lev Ivanov, an investigator from the prosecutor's office. After examining the bodies, the tent and the scene, and hearing from the search parties and the medical experts, the official conclusion of the investigation was released. The cause of death for the group was stated as compelling natural force, or sometimes translated as overwhelming unknown force. This was a very vague, unsatisfying conclusion. It basically said, something very strong from nature killed them, but we don't know what. The case was officially closed in May of 1959, just a few months after the bodies were found. The files were declared secret and put away. For decades, the case remained shrouded in secrecy, only fueling the rumors and theories. The lack of a clear explanation, the strange injuries, the abandoned tent, the official vagueness, all combined to make the Dyatlov Pass incident one of the most enduring and terrifying mysteries in modern history. Chapter 7. The Big Questions. Why? What? How? The official conclusion left more questions than answers. And these are the questions that have haunted people for over 60 years. Let us break them down. Question 1. Why did they cut their way out of the tent? This is perhaps the most fundamental question. The tent was their only shelter from the brutal cold. It was torn from the inside. This means someone or something inside the tent caused the damage. It suggests a sudden, desperate exit. Why not use the normal entrance? Were they trapped? Was there no time? Were they terrified of something inside the tent, or something that suddenly appeared outside the tent blocking their exit? This is crucial. It points to a sudden, extreme event. Question 2. Why were they so underdressed in freezing conditions? Temperatures on that night were estimated to be around -25 to -30 degrees Celsius. That is -13 to -22 degrees Fahrenheit. And the wind chill would have made it feel much, much colder. Yet some were in their underwear, some in socks, some with only one shoe. Why would experienced hikers leave the warmth of their tent so unprepared for such deadly cold? This reinforces the idea of a sudden panic, a rush to escape, where they did not have time to put on their proper winter gear. Question 3. Why were some bodies severely injured and others not? 5 of the 9 died mainly from hypothermia, though some had minor injuries. But Lyudmila, Semyon and Nikolai had horrific, non-hypothermic injuries, crushed ribs, fractured skulls, and Rustem and Alexander had significant head trauma. Why the difference? If it was an avalanche, why did it injure some so badly and leave others relatively untouched? If it was a human attack, why did some escape with just cold, while others were brutally beaten? This points to multiple layers of events, or a selective, strange force. Question 4. What caused the strange internal injuries, the broken ribs, the fractured skulls? Dr. Vozrojdeny said the force was like a car crash, but there was no sign of a car. No impact marks on the snow. No external bruising on the bodies to match the broken bones. This is a huge puzzle. How can you have such devastating internal trauma without clear external signs? It is baffling to forensic experts. It suggests a very unusual type of force. Question 5. The missing eyes and tongue. This is one of the most macabre details. Lyudmila's eyes and tongue were missing. Semyon's eyes were also missing. This has led to the wildest theories. Was it animals? But the clean removal, without other signs of scavenging, like gnawing marks on the bone, made some doubt this. Was it something else, something human, something unknown? This particular detail sends shivers down the spine. Question 6. Why did they run downhill and then try to return to the tent? The footprints showed they ran downhill away from the tent towards the forest. This makes sense if they were fleeing something. But then, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova and Slobodin were found higher up the slope, as if they were trying to return to the tent. Why? Were they trying to retrieve their belongings? Or were they trying to seek shelter again from whatever had chased them? This suggests a desperate, confusing struggle for survival. Question 7. Why were some belongings left behind and others moved? All their cameras, diaries, extra clothing and food were left in the tent. Yet some of the last 4 bodies were found wearing clothes taken from the first 5, suggesting a deliberate act of survival or salvage. This shows a transition from panic to a desperate attempt to survive, even if it was too late. Question 8. The strange orange tan and radiation claims. Some of the bodies, particularly Lyudmila Dubinina, were described as having a strange orange-reddish tan. This, combined with a later report that their clothes showed traces of radioactivity, fueled theories about military involvement or secret weapons. However, the orange tan could be a natural result of exposure to extreme cold and decomposition, and the radioactivity claim was very weak, possibly due to naturally occurring background radiation or contamination from handling materials. It was not enough to suggest a nuclear event. These questions, these inconsistencies, are why the Dyatlov Pass incident refuses to stay buried. They are why, for over 60 years, people have tried to find an answer, to bring some sense to this senseless tragedy. And that brings us to the theories, many theories, some grounded in science, some in speculation, and some are truly out there. Let us dive into them. Chapter 8. Exploring the theories. Many theories attempt to explain the Dyatlov Pass incident using natural phenomena. These are often the first explanations considered in any outdoor tragedy. Theory 1. The avalanche. This is probably the most widely discussed and, in recent years, the most accepted official theory. It posits that a sudden, unexpected avalanche, or more specifically, a slab avalanche where a large plate of snow detaches and slides down, struck the tent. This event explains several key aspects. If a slab of snow hit the tent, it could have partially buried it or shifted it, creating pressure. The hikers, fearing being buried alive, would have frantically cut their way out to escape, rather than trying to find the zipper, which might have been blocked or stuck, explaining the panic and sudden exit. Being asleep when the avalanche hit, they would have had no time to get properly dressed, thus fleeing in whatever they were wearing. Furthermore, the force of the moving snow could have caused the severe injuries like broken ribs and skull fractures, especially if they were hit or carried by the snow and slammed against something hard. Like rocks or trees, the no external bruising could be explained if the force was a broad pressure, not a localized impact. After escaping the tent, they would naturally run downhill, away from the perceived danger of more snow and towards the tree line for shelter. Evidence supporting this theory includes the fact that the tent was pitched on a slope, a known avalanche risk area, and snow accumulation was high that winter. The nature of the injuries, described as blunt force trauma, also aligns with an avalanche impact. Footprints were found leading away from the tent, consistent with an escape. Notably, a recent Russian investigation, reopened in 2019, largely concluded that an avalanche, combined with poor visibility and freezing temperatures, was the cause, and they even conducted simulations to support this. However, counter-arguments and problems exist. There was a lack of typical avalanche signs. Usually, an avalanche leaves a clear run-out zone and a debris field, but no large mound of snow debris around the tent suggested a massive avalanche. The tent was still partially standing, not completely flattened or carried away. Forensic issues also raise questions. Experts on avalanches have stated that the type of injuries sustained by Lyudmila and Semyon, broken ribs without external bruising, are not typical of avalanche impacts, which usually cause bruising and scrapes, and the skull fractures were very specific. The slope argument is also debated. While the tent was on a slope, it was not a very steep one, only about 20 degrees, which is generally considered less prone to large avalanches than steeper slopes, though slab avalanches can occur on shallower slopes. Furthermore, if an avalanche hit, why were some bodies found far from the tent and some later in the ravine? Why not all buried together? The time gap is another issue. If they were fleeing an avalanche, why did they take such a long time to die? Why were some able to try and get back to the tent? Finally, the psychological factor. Would an avalanche cause such a panic that they would flee without proper clothing and then wander to their deaths? Theory 2. Katabatic wind and hypothermia. This theory focuses on the extreme weather conditions, proposing that a sudden incredibly strong katabatic wind descended the mountain. A katabatic wind is a heavy, cold air mass that flows down a slope under the force of gravity, capable of being incredibly powerful and dropping temperatures very quickly. This phenomenon, combined with the already freezing conditions, would have led to rapid hypothermia and disorientation. The sudden, terrifying roar of an extreme wind, possibly combined with the tent flapping violently or collapsing, could have caused them to panic and flee. In a desperate rush to escape the perceived immediate danger, they would not have had time to dress properly. The extreme cold, combined with being underdressed and wet, would quickly lead to hypothermia for all of them, explaining the cause of death for most. Evidence supporting this includes the fact that the area is known for severe winds, and temperatures were indeed very low. Most of the bodies did show hypothermia as the cause of death. However, this theory does not explain the severe, blunt force trauma injuries found on Lyudmila, Semyon, Nikolai, Rustem, and Alexander. A strong wind cannot break ribs or shatter skulls in the way described. While wind could make the tent flap, it is unlikely to cause the neat, deliberate cuts from the inside. Furthermore, if they were just battling cold, they would have huddled together for warmth. Instead, they tried to make a fire, a small one, and some tried to get back to the tent, suggesting something more than just cold forced them out. Theory 3. Paradoxical undressing from hypothermia. This is a specific aspect of hypothermia. It states that in the final stages of severe hypothermia, some people experience a sensation of extreme heat, causing them to paradoxically remove their clothes, even in freezing conditions. This explains why some were found with so few clothes on, or even partially naked. They literally took them off as they were dying. It is a known, though rare, medical phenomenon in hypothermia cases. However, this theory does not explain why they fled the tent in the first place, or why they cut the tent. They would have been in the tent when this happened. It also does not explain the severe, non-hypothermic injuries. Additionally, some bodies were found wearing clothes taken from others, which is a conscious, rational act of survival, not the confused removal of clothes. In summary, while natural forces like avalanches and extreme cold clearly played a role in their deaths, these theories alone struggle to explain all the strange, contradictory details, especially the unusual injuries and the initial panic. This leads us to consider other, more sinister possibilities. Theory 4. Attack by the indigenous Mansi people. The Mansi are an indigenous ethnic group who live in the Ural Mountains. Their traditional lands include the area of the Dyatlov Pass. This theory suggests the hikers perhaps accidentally trespassed on sacred Mansi land or disturbed a Mansi hunting ground, and the Mansi, in anger or to protect their territory, attacked the group. The severe injuries could be explained by a violent attack using traditional weapons, prompting the hikers to flee. The missing eyes and tongue could be seen as a ritualistic act or a way to desecrate the bodies. Evidence supporting it includes the names Kolat Shakal, or Dead Mountain, and Otorten, or Doomed Go, which are from the Mansi language, suggesting the Mansi might have warned people away from the area. Initial reports did consider this possibility. However, counter-arguments and problems are significant. Investigators found no other human tracks besides those of the hikers. The Mansi people are generally known for being peaceful and hospitable, not violent. There were no recorded instances of them attacking outsiders, and they would typically warn trespassers, not brutally murder them. There was a lack of motive, with no evidence to suggest such a strong reason for a violent attack. The injuries are also not consistent with Mansi weapons. The nature of the blunt force trauma, like a car crash, is not consistent with traditional Mansi hunting weapons like spears or bows, and there were no knife wounds. Mansi involvement was quickly ruled out by investigators, as Lev Ivanov, the chief investigator, officially ruled it out very early on after speaking to local Mansi people who denied any involvement. Theory 5. Attack by escaped prisoners or other unsavory people. This theory suggests that the group encountered other dangerous humans in the wilderness, perhaps escaped prisoners, criminals, or possibly even agents of the Soviet secret police doing something illegal. These people would have attacked the hikers to silence them or prevent them from reporting what they saw. The sudden attack would explain the panic, the cutting of the tent, and the severe injuries. The secrecy around the case could also be explained by the authorities wanting to hide the existence of such dangerous individuals or their own illicit activities. The general atmosphere of secrecy in the Soviet Union at the time lends some abstract support. However, once again, no other human tracks were found at the scene. which is a major issue for any human-based theory. There were no clear signs of a prolonged struggle or fight inside or outside the tent. The motive for mutilation, such as the missing eyes and tongue, is not typical of a simple silencing operation. It is highly unlikely that escaped prisoners would be in such a remote area, in such extreme conditions, with the means to inflict such specific injuries. Furthermore, all valuables, cameras, and money were left in the tent. If it was criminals, they would typically steal things. These human-based theories often fall apart due to the lack of evidence of other people at the scene and the unique nature of the injuries. They also do not fully explain the extreme panic and flight from the tent. Theory 6. Military weapons testing. Rockets, explosions, or parachute mines. This theory posits that the hikers accidentally strayed into a secret military testing ground where the Soviet military was testing some kind of weapon, perhaps a rocket, a new type of bomb, or a parachute mine, a mine dropped from the air that explodes above the ground. The explosion or blast wave caused the panic and the injuries. A sudden loud explosion or a blast wave could have terrified the hikers, causing them to cut their way out of the tent in a desperate attempt to escape. A powerful blast wave could cause blunt force trauma without external marks, especially internal injuries like broken ribs, and severe skull fractures could also result from such a force. If it was a new weapon, perhaps something radioactive, this could explain the strange discoloration on the bodies and the disputed traces of radioactivity on their clothes. There were later reports from other hiking groups and local people in the area who saw strange fireballs or glowing spheres in the sky around the time of the incident, which could be rockets or experimental craft. The Soviet government would absolutely want to cover up a military accident that killed civilians, especially if it involved secret weapons, explaining why the case files were quickly closed and marked secret. Evidence supporting this includes reports of fireballs from other groups, with one group even recording a photo. The radiation claim, though debated, is also cited. The location was somewhat near known rocket launch sites or test ranges. The unusual nature of the injuries, described as similar to a car crash, could align with a powerful blast. However, counter-arguments and problems arise. If a bomb or rocket hit, even a small one, there would be a crater, but no crater was found. Typical blast injuries include ruptured eardrums, internal organ damage from pressure waves, burns, or shrapnel, but these were not consistently found. The injuries were specifically blunt force trauma, not blast trauma. The fireballs could be natural phenomena, such as re-entering space debris or meteors, and the sighting could be unrelated. The radiation detected on the clothes was very low, possibly background radiation or contamination from old equipment, and not consistent with a nuclear explosion. Furthermore, if the military was covering it up, why leave the bodies in place to be found? Why not remove them entirely or dispose of them? The fact that they were found, and then a vague report was issued, seems like a clumsy cover-up if it was a direct military hit. Theory 7. Military cleanup or black ops. This is a darker version of the military theory, suggesting the hikers did witness something secret, like a weapon test or a clandestine military operation. Instead of an accidental blast, the military then sent in a cleanup crew or special forces to eliminate the witnesses. The severe injuries could be from a brutal, deliberate attack by trained operatives. The missing eyes and tongue could be an act of intimidation or a strange way to hide the identities of the victims. This would explain the extreme secrecy and the cover-up, as well as the hikers' flight from the military operatives. The general Soviet secrecy is the main abstract evidence supporting this. However, there were still no other human tracks, which is a massive hole in any human attack theory. There were also no signs of a struggle between the hikers and attackers. Why inflict such specific injuries, like broken ribs internally without external bruising, when they could have simply shot them? Again, a trained cleanup crew would likely remove all evidence. Leaving the bodies, even with a vague report, points to something less controlled. Theory 8. Test subjects or experimentation. A more extreme version of the military theory posits that the hikers were intentionally targeted and used as test subjects for a weapon, a gas, or some other experiment, possibly to observe their reactions. The effects of a gas or psychological weapon could explain the panic and the strange behavior. and the injuries could be from an external force or even internal reactions. The mutilations might be a side effect of a weapon or a deliberate action by the experimenters. This would provide the ultimate reason for a deep cover-up. However, this is pure speculation with no evidence whatsoever to support it. It is a very dark, unproven idea. There is a complete lack of physical evidence, such as chemical residue, signs of gas, or strange equipment. The military theories are tempting because they explain the secrecy and the unusual nature of the events. However, they consistently struggle with the physical evidence, or lack thereof, particularly the absence of other tracks and the specific, unique nature of the injuries. Theory 9. The Yeti or Bigfoot. This theory suggests a large ape-like creature, a Yeti, often called the Russian Bigfoot, attacked the group. The sudden appearance of such a terrifying creature would certainly cause a panicked flight, leading them to cut their tent. A powerful creature could inflict blunt force trauma like broken ribs and skulls. Mutilations could be a characteristic of such a creature, or a simple result of feeding or curiosity. Local legends sometimes speak of such creatures in the mountains, and the unexplained force could indeed be a large, powerful animal. However, no large, ape-like footprints were found, nor was any animal fur or biological evidence like hair or blood. Animal attacks usually leave claw marks, bite marks, or signs of tearing, but the internal blunt force trauma without external marks is not typical of a large animal attack. This theory is purely speculative, as there is no scientific evidence that Yetis or Bigfoots exist, let alone were present at the Dyatlov Pass. Theory 10. UFOs or aliens. This theory proposes that the hikers encountered extraterrestrial beings or their spacecraft. The aliens either attacked them, possibly experimenting on them, or the encounter caused extreme panic and unusual effects. An encounter with aliens would be terrifying, explaining the panic and flight. Strange injuries and mutilations could be from alien weapons or procedures. The fireballs reported by other groups could be alien spacecraft, and the orange tan and radiation could be from alien technology. Extreme secrecy is often attributed to governments covering up alien encounters. However, there is no physical evidence whatsoever. No spacecraft, no alien tracks, no alien biological material. This is a theory based purely on the unknown, with no supporting evidence. As discussed, fireballs can also be explained by natural phenomena or human-made objects and could be entirely unrelated. Theory 11. Infrasound. This is a more scientifically plausible yet still unsettling, unexplained theory. It suggests that the specific topography of Kholat Shakhl, combined with powerful winds, created a phenomenon called infrasound. Infrasound is very low-frequency sound, below the range of human hearing. But even though we cannot hear it, our bodies can feel it. Exposure to strong infrasound can cause feelings of dread, anxiety, nausea, panic, confusion, and even hallucinations. A sudden overwhelming wave of infrasound could have instantly plunged the group into a state of extreme terror and panic, causing them to flee the tent in whatever they were wearing, cutting their way out to escape the perceived terror, acting irrationally. The infrasound could also have disoriented them, leading them to run in the wrong direction or make irrational decisions, like trying to return to the tent in a blizzard. The specific mountain shape and wind conditions could potentially create infrasound, and the known effects of infrasound on human psychology lend credibility to the panic aspect. It explains the initial, sudden panic very well. However, this theory does not directly explain the severe blunt force trauma, which is its main weakness. While it explains the panic, it does not explain how Lyudmila and Semyon got crushed ribs, or Nikolai a shattered skull, without external marks. Some proponents suggest that in a state of extreme panic and disorientation, the hikers could have stumbled, fallen down the ravine, or impacted rocks with incredible force without being fully aware of it, leading to the injuries, or that the panic itself led to frantic, violent movements, causing self-inflicted internal trauma, though this is a stretch for the severe injuries observed. It is also very difficult to retrospectively prove the existence of infrasound at a specific time and place decades ago, making it largely speculative. While scientifically plausible for the panic, its direct link to the physical injuries is speculative. The truly unexplained theories are captivating because they offer explanations for the inexplicable aspects, but they often lack concrete evidence. They rely on the absence of conventional explanations to fill the void with the extraordinary. Chapter 12. The Enduring Mystery. Why We Still Care. Over 60 years have passed since the Dyatlov Pass incident. Decades of investigation, speculation, documentaries, books, and countless internet discussions. Yet the definitive answer remains elusive. The case was officially reopened by the Russian Prosecutor General's office in 2019, largely due to public demand and the enduring mystery. In 2020, they announced their official findings. They concluded that an avalanche, combined with hypothermia, was the cause of death. They said a slab avalanche hit the tent, forcing the hikers to cut their way out. Then, in the dark and blizzard conditions, they were disoriented and perished from the cold. They specifically ruled out any criminal activity, Mansi attack, or military involvement. This official conclusion, while attempting to provide closure, still leaves many people unsatisfied. It struggles to fully explain the extent and nature of the injuries, particularly the internal blunt force trauma without external bruising and the missing eyes and tongue. While the avalanche theory is the most scientifically plausible for some aspects, it still feels incomplete for all the bizarre details. So why does the Dyatlov Pass incident continue to fascinate us? Why does it haunt our collective imagination? The human element. It involves 9 young, vibrant lives cut short in a horrifying way. We empathize with them. We try to imagine their last moments, their fear, their desperation. It is a deeply human tragedy. The unexplained. Human beings are inherently curious. When something defies explanation, especially something so extreme and bizarre, our minds crave answers. The overwhelming unknown force acts as a powerful magnet for speculation. The power of nature. The incident reminds us of the raw, brutal power of nature. Mountains, blizzards, avalanches, these forces can be terrifying and unforgiving. It is a cautionary tale of venturing into the wild. The secrecy. The initial Soviet secrecy, the quick closure of the case, and the vague official report created a perfect breeding ground for conspiracy theories. When information is withheld, the human mind fills the gaps with its darkest imaginings. The macabre details, the cut tent, the undressed bodies, the broken ribs, the missing eyes, and tongue. These specific, gruesome details stick in the mind and are hard to rationalize away. They are not typical of a simple accident. The what if. Every theory, every counter-argument makes us consider what really happened. What if it was an avalanche but something else happened right after? What if they were disoriented by something we don't understand? The what if keeps the mystery alive. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains a dark stain on the map of human exploration. It is a story whispered around campfires, debated in online forums, and analyzed by professionals. It stands as a stark reminder that sometimes, even with all the evidence, all the theories, and all the investigations, some mysteries simply refuse to yield their secrets. The 9 hikers of the Dyatlov Pass expedition went searching for adventure. They found something else entirely. Something terrifying, something that to this day still waits in the cold, silent peaks of the Ural Mountains. And perhaps for some mysteries, the lack of a definitive answer is in itself the most chilling conclusion of all. We may never truly know what really killed them in the snow. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey into the unknown. Stay safe out there.